This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trevor Sheeran.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. We are so glad to be joining you. I am Trevor Sheeran, joined as always by Dr. Mark Mayfield.
Good morning.
Today, we want to talk about healthy communication, which if, the astute among you may think, isn't that like all you guys talk about ever?
The whole podcast for the last year and a half has been about healthy communication.
And you're right. But today we want to focus in on a few basically relationship communication hacks that you can use.
It's an interesting word.
Yeah, it's definitely the wrong right word.
The wrong right word. Okay.
So as we enter into this conversation, what are we considering to be this communication hack? Or a skill is a better word, but hack sounds more fun.
Okay. I'm wrapping my mind around that one. No, it's interesting that you say that because I cannot tell you how many times I've sat with couples and I'm like, have you tried this? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
We can do that? Or that sounds really strange. I'll try it. And then they come back going,
that was the best thing ever.
That was the best thing ever. How come I didn't know about this? I'm like, and I have to remind myself, and I think you do too, that the things that we've learned are not necessarily common knowledge.
Totally.
And communication patterns and styles get passed down from generation to generation. So and I remember talking with families and couples throughout my career so far of, well, at least I'm doing it better than my dad. I'm like, well, your dad must have sucked.
Because if the bar's low enough.
Right, if the bar's low, because you're not doing such a good job. But okay, I'll give you that you're,
Yeah.
And it's that awareness and that understanding of, okay, I didn't have a good example. I don't have a good example. I don't, whatever.
Yeah.
Give me some tools. And so I don't know where you want to start, but we can go through a list of things that can create some potential communication breakthroughs for people.
Well, you can probably imagine where I would start with this conversation, and it's with a simple video that I love so dearly. We'll put a link in the description. It's called "It's Not About the Nail,"
right?
And the basic concept is that. And they do it from the position of the female is talking about some sort of struggle that she's having,
pain,
and the husband is talking about or is trying to listen,
right?
But the wife has a nail in her head and she's complaining about head pressure and her
sweater's getting snagged.
Yeah. And so he keeps saying I bet you if we got rid of that nail, and she keeps saying it's not about the nail. I just need you to listen. And oftentimes we come into a conversation and we want to be able to fix it. Maybe we see exactly what needs to happen in order to fix that problem. But it can be far more meaningful to be able to just listen and make it not about the nail.
One of my favorite responses that I help coach couples in, it could be a female or male response, doesn't matter, or just a partner response, however that looks, right, is this idea of validating, right? Mm-hmm. That really sucks that you feel that way.
Yeah.
I am so sorry. Yep. How can I support you?
Yep.
Right? And I bet you in that video, right, with the nail, if he would have done that, she was, well, okay, how do we get rid of this pressure? And then he could enter in to go, well, let me go get a hammer and take the nail out.
We're going to pull this nail out.
But we forget, even if it doesn't make sense to us, we forget the importance of validation. And I want people that are listening to go, to think about this. When was the last time you were truly validated in your feelings?
Yeah.
Right? I think you and I talk about this all the time with our clients and just in public is that, if I'm working with you, your feelings don't have to make an ounce of sense to me.
Right.
Okay, you just skinned your knee. Why are you freaking out and thinking you have to amputate your leg?
Right.
Okay, that's where you are right now. It doesn't have to make an ounce of sense to me. So let me figure out how to validate where you're at and then ask how I can support you.
Yeah.
And I think couples get caught up in whether it be roles or whether it be just patterns or whatever that a lot of those major arguments spiral out of something so simple.
Well, and I think I really like the analogy of skinning your knee, because if we take that concept of it's not about the nail, it really could be that it's not about the skinned knee. I could have had a grandfather who, when he was young, scraped his knee and it got infected and he had to lose his leg. And because of that, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
That could be part of my history.
Sure. That'd be interesting.
And so I'm freaking out because I'm thinking, oh no, that's going to happen to me. And it goes to this idea of all behavior makes sense in its context, where if we add enough context to what's going on, things start to make a little bit of sense. The only way we can get there is by listening and validating and investing.
Think about a little kid that skins their knee, and maybe it's their first skinned knee. And you've had thousands of skinned knees. That's their first. Mm-hmm. And they're freaking out because it's a new sensation. It's bleeding. Yeah. And you're like, just rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine. What does that teach them? Versus getting down on their level and going, man, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Let's go wash it off. It'll be okay. Mm-hmm. It's going to scab up, and we'll put a Band-Aid on it. Yeah. And let me hold you for a while, and you'll be fine. So translating that into adult relationships, right? It's I think a lot of it is, like you said, the context piece, but also I think finding out what the reason for that communication is, the reason for why they're coming to you. I've asked couples a lot of times, going, have you prefaced the conversation before you started? And they're like, that. What do you mean? And I'm like, so if your spouse comes to you and starts talking and you are starting to get kind of tense in your stomach or your chest because you're like, how do I need to respond to this? You can stop them and go, okay, is this I just need to listen conversation? Is this I need to fix it conversation? Mm-hmm. Is this I need to validate conversation? Or is this whatever you guys, whatever that you decide? I always have couples decide what are their 5 things.
Yeah, the 5 options almost.
And somebody said, well, isn't that kind of impersonal? I said, well, if you want to get it right, you need to start learning this. Right. And after a while, you don't have to ask the question, right? Because you're going to know.
Sometimes Bree will come home and she'll tell me, Trevor, I need you to say this, this, and this. You ready? And then she'll start talking, and I respond with exactly what she's told me to say. And that tends to be very meaningful, because even there have been times where she's like, I need you to tell me I'm right and that this person was wrong and that it's okay for me to be upset. And there's been times where I actually have not agreed with those things. And so instinctually, I would never have said those. Right. But I knew it's more important to be able to say to Bree what she needs to hear and to comfort her in that moment than to be right.
Right. Well, I think that's the other thing too, is that it goes both ways. So I might stop my wife and say, okay, what kind of conversation is this? But if she's in the relationship just as much as I am, she might preface it beforehand. Yeah. And that's kind of where the dance becomes. And there's a lot of times where she's like, I just need you to listen. Okay, I can do that. And I have to
pretty good at that.
And I have to make sure that I'm checking my emotions going.
Totally.
Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that. Yeah. It doesn't really matter at that time. And then at the end of the conversation, I try to go, okay, so how can I support you? And this and she goes, well, you listened. That was great. Okay. And then I have to go walk away and go, how am I going to deal with my emotions? Yeah. And that's right. The phrase that I tell couples time and time again too, is that if your spouse is emoting and it's affecting you, what is yours to own and what is yours not to own, and make sure that you differentiate that, because you might walk away emotionally upset because you just listened and you couldn't do anything about it, but it's really not about you. Yeah. It was about them. So putting it, those kind of conversations. Yeah. But one thing I liked about what you said was the fact that you didn't agree, but you listened. So it really wasn't about you. And I think there's also some assumptions there that you made that were positive about your wife, assuming the best about her, assuming about her needs and that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the things that couples don't do a very good job of either, is those assumptions. We come into those assumptions that our spouse is this or a spouse is that. Yeah. And so we already have our mind made up before we even enter into a conversation.
Yeah. And I think even as we're talking about this, I can see so many parallels to just like good friendships, or even child-parental relationships, that some of these tools, I think in our context, they make a lot of sense in a marital perspective, but they're tools that can be used in totally different settings too. You know, I use a hammer in a far different way than a construction worker would use a hammer. Different projects, stuff like that, but it's still the same tool.
Right.
And that's why I think it's so invaluable that we invest and work on ourselves in the midst of our development in these communication skills. Because if I know how to interrupt a conversation and say, hey, Mark, before you keep going, I want to make sure that I understand what you need from me.
Right.
Is this a conversation that you want my input on the situation, or do you need me just to listen?
Right. And that's such a powerful, but if you were to do that with me, I'd be like, oh, he really does care.
It says a lot.
There's an honoring piece of that, right? And I think that's a posture of seeking to understand. Mm-hmm. And I think we talk about part of communication that we don't talk about very often is the listening.
Yeah.
And how much of listening is what's being said.
Right.
Right. And I think a lot of us in our programs, counseling programs, we're surprised to hear that listening is only about 10% of what's being said.
Yeah.
90% of the body language, 90% of the posture, 90% of the response,
Yep.
the facial features, all that kind of stuff. And so I always tell couples, I said, so how well do you listen? Mm-hmm. And one of them usually laughs. And I'm like, well, tell me about that. And so I think this posture of seeking to understand is like you just did. Let me stop you for a second. I want to make sure that I'm present and needing what you're providing what you need. Yeah. But it's also about asking questions.
Mm-hmm. And not leading questions either.
No, but curious.
Yeah.
Like, okay, help me understand.
So instead of, hey, Mark, did you try to not do that?
Right.
It is far different than what other things have you tried?
Right. Or it sounds like that you've tried a lot, which one's worked? Or it sounds like, that you're really struggling. Is there, how does that make you feel? Or, right. So it's that, or what have you tried?
Yeah.
Or whatever,
Totally.
I mean, so it's curiosity. I think if you go back to, and I'll be a scientific person for a second, but the scientific method, right? Mm-hmm. Part of that is curiousness.
Yeah.
You're looking in this theory or this idea, and you're just curious about it. You're not making any assumptions. You're not trying your best not to have any biases, but you're just curious and asking questions. And I think a lot of times in relationships, we've lost the curiousness.
Yeah.
And so how do we re-engage that curiousness around our spouse?
Yeah. One easy way that you can start to do that is a lot of us are connected to friends on Facebook, and I've found something really enjoyable with if I see somebody that I've really only interacted with over Facebook in the past few months,
right,
to choose something from their Facebook post and say, hey, do I remember seeing this on your Facebook? Can you tell me more about that? I'm interested to hear this. And that starts the conversation really easily. And then it also gives you some points of contact for more curiosity of, they may have explicitly told you on the post, like they got a dog and it's this way, but it seemed like there was excitement. And so you have the opportunity to choose something easy to start being curious about. How's the dog doing? What are some of the new things that they're doing? Stuff like that. It can be really meaningful. It says something about your interest in the person and in the relationship and what you're willing to invest. Well,
and I think one thing that I think that's fantastic, and I think that's even with our significant others is really digging in that way. And one of the things that I like about John and Julie Gottman, they're marriage gurus and have been in the field for 40 plus years and doing a lot of research. One of the things that they found to effective communication is what they call soft startups. And so a lot of times when we're upset, we use harsh startups. Why didn't you? You didn't. You didn't. And I think this is where the emotional intelligence, let's go back and listen to how many episodes we've talked about, what do you do with the mad that you feel and all those kind of things, is recognizing where we're at. Okay, your comment to me was a little bit sharp, and I have a chance to react and match the sharpness or exceed it, or take a step back and go, okay, that stung a little bit, but there's something going on there. So do a soft startup. It sounds like this sounds really stupid, but it sounds like you're upset. And don't say it sounds like it's stupid, but like for me coming right now, and the podcast going, this it seems like almost a cliche. Well, you just yelled at me. It sounds like you're upset. Yeah. But what that does is it puts it back on them and gives them a chance to go, yeah, I am upset. And then you can ask questions.
Yeah.
Instead of responding going, what the heck is your problem? Why did you just snap at me?
Right.
And so I've done this with a couple couples in the sense that, there's bigger context, right? So you're coming in, you're a safe place because you're a spouse, and maybe they just had an argument with a daughter or a son or a coworker, and you're the first person they see after that. Yeah. They're going to be a little ruffled.
Yeah.
And so asking that, they snap at you instead of snapping back, and now it escalates and it's about something stupid. You can just go, well, it sounds like something happened and you're emotional right now. Can you tell me what's going on? How can I support you? And good grief, I have couples coming back going, what? That just diffused everything. And they were like, they melted, and they were telling me, here's what happened. And typically I would have snapped back, and then we would have fought, and then we would have not, I'm like,
I'm reminded of early on in my relationship with Bree. She would come home from work or school or something, and she'd have a lot of emotion that she needed to express. And so she'd be telling me the story, and she'd be saying all the things she wished she could have said to this person or that person, or how frustrated this made her. But it would all be directed in towards me. Not in that she was angry at me, but she'd be telling the story, and it'd be similar to, and then I looked at him and I was like, you don't get the right to tell me that, blah, blah, blah. And so very much she's telling the story.
Well, she's a very expressive storyteller.
Very expressive storyteller. I love that about her. And so there were a lot of times where I felt like I was being attacked
right.
in that, and being able to learn to separate myself from that story and get on her side and be able to understand there's a lot of frustration in this, and it's not towards me, it's towards somebody else. I'm safe. I'm okay. And I think, and that took probably several months of that happening almost every single day for me to be able to become used to it and to understand what was happening and not have to continually remind myself this is going on. But I think a lot of us find ourselves in positions where we do need to remind ourselves pretty consistently in a conversation, okay, where am I? Where is this person? Where is this person coming from? How would be best for me to respond? What if they told me is the best way to respond in these situations? Have I asked them what they need from me?
Well, one thing too, though, that I really encourage couples, and it feels very systematic, but maybe you have an argument and you don't handle it well, and because of communication, go back after you've calmed down and go, let's critique this.
Yeah.
How'd I do? How'd you do? What could we have done better? And that's where there's an investment in the relationship. But if you're okay, I think I want to give people maybe 3 or 4 bullet points, because we talked a lot about a lot of cool things. So I think the first one is just engage and reevaluate your listening. Do you pick up on facial features? Do you pick up on emotions? Do you pick up on body language? What's not being said?
Go listen to our episode on reflective listening.
Right. Are you listening to respond, or are you listening to listen?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one, and kind of a self-evaluation piece. How well do you seek to understand? How curious are you in your relationship? I think is a big one. And then it's this: are you listening to listen? Are you listening to be right? Are you communicating to be right? Are you communicating to figure things out? I think is a big one. But also, I think the biggest one is the soft startups, and that's a lot about your own emotional intelligence. And so you could be as ticked off as you want to be, and you can still step into that moment going, okay, deep breath. It sounds like, or I feel that, or it appears to me that, and it's that soft startup, and it'll diffuse not only your partner, but it'll diffuse you as well. And then preface things. Learn how to preface those conversations, because all of us need somebody to help us fix things, but it's not every time. All of us need somebody to listen, but it might not be every time. All of us need somebody just to validate, and it might not be every time, right? And then it's funny because we joke, Sarah and I want to write a book someday about the confessions of a counselor's wife or something like that. But there's times, and I used to be a pastor beforehand too, right? So I have to ask her, okay, do you want me to be a pastor, a counselor, your husband? Like, what role am I taking right now? And we joke about that, but there's truth to that. I think everybody has those different roles, right? Whatever you whatever position you're in. Yeah. So taking those times to really clarify that.
Yeah. One other thing I think is coming up with codes. Is a really beautiful way. If there are certain conversations that are really hard, or that certain situations keep coming up, being able to come up with a code. I know one friend of mine, they will hold up fingers of 1 or 2 fingers that will express to the other person, I need you to listen, or I need you to help me out.
Or go away.
Or
leave
go
me
away.
Leave me
Or
alone right now.
things that you wouldn't want, that are really still very uncomfortable to say, hey, I'm really frustrated with you and I need time away from you. Will you please leave me alone for a few minutes?
Right.
May be really difficult to say out loud, but if you come up with a code of like, hey, I'm going to text you this emoji on my way home, that means it's been a really hard day and I just need a few minutes.
And I think that's a great way to break away from generational patterns too. Because I think, this is where we talk about marriage is good, but it's hard work. Yeah. Relationships are good, but they're hard work. This is the hard work, but there's good in that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us feel like we're just at times products of our past, products of our upbringing. Yeah. And we can think that way. That's kind of that fixed mindset. Or we can go, okay, that's how I was raised. That's my model. But that's not what I want for my wife or my kids or my husband or my spouse, whatever that looks like. I don't want that to be the model. And so I'm going to have to really work hard at this.
Yeah.
And guys, it is hard work.
Yeah.
I remember when we, the whole love languages thing, which is another episode that we did, physical touch is not my love language, but it's my wife's. And one thing that I really try hard to do, and I'm still working on it, and it still takes work, is that I won't leave a room without physically touching her in some way. A hand on the back or the shoulder, a kiss on the forehead, and you get creative. But and I remember early on in our marriage when I told her that I'm going to work on that. I could see it kill her a little bit. Going, you don't want to, and I'm like, no, I do want to. It's not my something that I'm used to. Yeah. So I'm going to work at it. And then she had to realize that me working at it meant I wanted to.
Right.
And there was that, right? And so anything that we're talking about today, if it does take work, give your spouse a benefit of the doubt that they're doing it because they love you and that they want this to be good. Yeah. Not that I have to work at it because, I don't really care or want to. So assuming the best of each other, I think is a big deal.
And I think in our development, small, slow growth is good growth.
Right. It's sustainable.
And I think that we should work hard and diligently to be on that slow, small growth track always. Right. And not give up.
So one of the things that I want as we're closing today, I'm going to look this up on my computer for those of you that are not watching and listening. But I want to give you a couple books and resources I think would be really beneficial for you. There's a new one that came out that I really like. It's called Eight Dates, Essential Conversations for a Lifetime of Love by John and Julie Gottman. There's also 7 Principles for Making a Marriage Work. But if you really look on Amazon and search their stuff is really good. But another book that I'd encourage you.
And if you go to the Gottman website, they have some really exceptional resources for couples and friends and just families. I mean, they've been doing research on relationships for 30, 40 years.
Yeah. And then I'd be remiss not to talk about one of our own counselors who's written a lot of books with her husband, Greg and Erin Smalley. Dr. Greg and Erin Smalley have this book called A Crazy Little Thing Called Marriage, 12 Secrets to a Lifelong Romance. And I think it just gives us, those tips and tricks of how to really engage each other. So there's a lot of resources out there. If you want more, feel free to email us at contact@Mayfield Counseling or candid@Mayfield Counseling, and we'll help you out.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.